You think you know what prison is. You imagine cold walls, iron bars, the smell of dampness and fear. But you are mistaken. The real prison is not stone or steel, but life itself, trapped in a cycle of hopelessness, filth, and pain. Here, every breath is soaked in fear, every morning begins with hunger, and every evening ends with someone's shattered fate. Here, you are not a person, you are a function, a cog in a giant machine, grinding hope into routine pain. But before you settle in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I'm really curious to see who has joined us. Now, make yourself comfortable. We're beginning. You never planned to end up here. Not in this cold, dark place where the air feels heavier with each breath, where the dampness clings to your skin like a constant reminder of the life you're now tied to. And yet, here you are, a tamer of the broken, a keeper of the lost, a prison guard, or, let's be honest, more of a jailer. It wasn't supposed to be this way. You didn't grow up dreaming of chains, or bars, or the smell of fear and sweat that fills these stone walls. You imagined something else entirely, didn't you? But here you stand, your boots echoing in the narrow hallways, the creaking doors your only companions. The truth is, it didn't happen overnight. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to wear the uniform of a prison guard. It was more gradual than that, like the slow, inexorable creep of winter. One wrong turn after another, one bad decision, one unfortunate twist of fate, and there you were. But it wasn't your fault, at least not entirely. No, it was the world that had turned its back on you. Society had given you no choice, no real options. After all, who else was going to do this job? Who else would stand between the criminals and the rest of the world? Make sure they didn't get any funny ideas. That's how you ended up in this dingy, poorly lit office, the smell of mildew and stale bread lingering in the air. You remember the first time you saw the prison, a hulking structure looming on the horizon like a monument to despair. You thought it would be easy. You thought you'd be nothing more than a nameless face, walking the same routine day in and day out. And to be fair, it's mostly true. But there's a difference between what you thought and what you experience. Because here, in this place, everyone wears a mask. The prisoners wear the mask of guilt, the mask of regret, or sometimes the mask of defiance. You, on the other hand, wear the mask of authority. You're the one with the keys, the one who holds their fate in your hands. But how long can you wear that mask before it becomes part of you? How long before you start to believe the lies, even if only to survive? Your first day was an assault on the senses. You expected the stench of sweat, the groans of the condemned, the clinking of chains, but you weren't ready for the silence. The silence is what gets you. It presses against you, smothering you, as though the very walls of the prison are closing in, and you, like everyone else, are trapped within them. The faces of the prisoners blur together in your mind, their eyes, filled with a strange mixture of hope and terror, follow you wherever you go. You're supposed to be their keeper, their warden, but in the beginning, you were more like a stranger in a foreign land. You were briefed on the job, of course, told exactly what to do. Guard the gates, check the cells, prevent any escape attempts, make sure everything runs smoothly. But no one told you what it would feel like to look into those eyes. No one told you that one day you'd walk past a prisoner and see them staring at you, and you'd wonder for a split second if they saw through your mask. They are not the same as the world outside. Here, they are stripped of everything, not just their belongings, but their very humanity. They are ghosts in a living hell, and you're just the one who stands over them, counting the minutes until their souls leave them, whether through death or despair. Of course, there are those who belong here, the violent, the unrepentant, the ones whose actions are unforgivable. But then there are the others, the ones who don't belong. They got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they made a choice that led them here, but they are not who they seem. They don't fit into the mold. You can see it in their eyes when they speak. They are broken, yes, but not beyond repair. Some days, it's almost worse to look at them than the hardened criminals. They remind you that life is fragile, that any one of us could slip and fall into the abyss. That's the thought that haunts you as you walk down the cold stone halls, keys jangling in your pocket. And then there are the others, the ones who make you question everything you thought you knew about yourself, the ones who bring a twisted sense of power. You're not just a guard to them, you're a symbol, you're the face of oppression, the hand of the law, the keeper of their fate, and they resent you for it, just as you resent them. But it's a cold, mutual hatred that you carry because you both know the truth. Neither of you is really free. Not anymore. You'll come to understand that the days blur together here. You'll lose track of time. Weeks will go by without you even realizing it, until one day the calendar will remind you that you've been here far too long. The rhythm of your life becomes just as predictable as the walls themselves. Open the door, close the door, check the cell, watch the prisoners, repeat. But there are moments. There are moments when everything feels wrong, when the weight of the uniform presses against your chest, and you wonder if the prison has become more than just the place where you work. You wonder if it's become a part of you. You didn't expect any of this. But now, as the sun sets outside, casting a thin sliver of light through the barred windows, you realize that you've become just another cog in this endless machine. A cog, a shadow, a keeper. You might not know why you're here, but you know one thing for sure. You'll never leave. There is a certain poetry in the ugliness of it all. The prison, at first glance, is nothing but stone and iron, a monument to everything society wishes to forget. But as you walk its halls, you see how it is not just a building, it is a living thing, breathing and pulsating with the suffering of hundreds. You stand in the center of it all, and the sheer weight of human misery seems to press in on you from every direction. On your second week, you finally allow yourself to notice the details. The stone walls are slick with condensation, even in the height of summer. You find that nothing ever truly dries here. Not the floor, not the blankets, not the bread you hand out during the midday meal. Dampness is your constant companion, soaking into your clothes and skin, and you cannot remember what it felt like to be truly warm. The darkness is complete in places, broken only by the thin shafts of candlelight that gutter and struggle against the gloom. You once believed prisons were for monsters. Now, as you pace along the walkways, you see that they are mostly for those the world no longer wishes to see. The poor, the unlucky, the ones whose families could not pay a bribe to keep them out. There are murderers, of course, some so terrible they do not even speak, but for every one of those, there are 10 whose crimes are petty and almost laughable. You meet a woman who stole a loaf of bread to feed her children, and a boy who lied about the weight of a fish at market. The crimes, like the people, are mundane. It is their poverty that truly condemns them. Your boots echo in the vast arched corridors, and with each step, you begin to realize just how many souls are locked away here. Some have been forgotten for years, their names no longer spoken by anyone on the outside. The young become old quickly in these walls. The old become ancient. You watch as their bodies bend and shrink, as the spark in their eyes is slowly snuffed out by boredom, by hunger, by the certainty that nothing will ever change. No one comes to visit, not really. Sometimes a priest will appear, trailing incense and empty promises, but the prisoners have learned not to hope for mercy. Families visit less and less with each passing month, until finally, the only people who know the prisoners exist are the other prisoners and you. You become their last tether to the world beyond these walls. Some of them talk to you, not out of hope, but out of desperation. Their stories are always the same, tales of mistakes, of regret, of a single moment that shattered everything. At first, you try not to listen. You tell yourself you are only here to do a job, to keep order, to make sure no one escapes or dies before their time. But over time, the stories seep into you. You find yourself thinking about them when you lie awake at night, when you stare at the moldy ceiling of your own small room. The prisoners become less like numbers and more like shadows, shadows you cannot shake, no matter how much you want to. There are nights when the wind howls through the cracks in the walls, and the cries of the inmates blend with the sound until you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. The smell is always worst at night, sour, unwashed bodies mingled with rot, and the faint, coppery tang of blood. Rats scurry through the halls, bold as anything, and you sometimes wonder if the prisoners envy their freedom. You learn, too, that the prison is a world unto itself. Rules are different here. The currency is not money, but scraps of food, a dry blanket, a moment of warmth by the kitchen fires. You watch the inmates trade these things in the shadows, always careful not to be seen by you or your fellow guards. Sometimes you let it slide, sometimes you punish them. You cannot decide which choice makes you more human or less. The other guards tell you not to get involved, not to care. They are all here for a reason, they say. But when you look into the hollowed faces of the prisoners, you are not so sure. You see hunger, fear, and something even deeper, a longing for someone to remember them, to acknowledge that they are still alive. As the days pass, the line between you and them grows thin. You are not a prisoner, but you are just as trapped. Every morning, you rise before the sun, eat a crust of stale bread, and march through the same cold halls. The locks and bars that keep them inside keep you here as well. There is no escape for you either, only the slow, grinding routine that eats away at your spirit just as surely as it eats away at theirs. You find yourself wondering, in your weakest moments, if you are being punished for something too. Perhaps you are here because you are just as unwanted as they are, just as invisible. The world outside moves on, forgetting you as surely as it forgets the men and women you watch over. You are the gatekeeper, yes, but you are also the outcast, the one who lives in the shadow of the prison, condemned to walk its halls for the rest of your days. And so you endure. Day after day, you put on your uniform, pick up your ring of heavy keys, and step once more into the endless gloom. The prison does not care if you suffer, it simply is. It devours the lost, the broken, and the forgotten. And whether you like it or not, you are one of them now. You were told not to get close. This warning, repeated in 100 forms, is as much a part of your training as how to wield a club or count the heads at roll call. Never let them see you as a person. Never befriend them. Never show sympathy. Never slip into the trap of thinking you could ever be like them. The bars are supposed to separate not just their bodies from the world, but your soul from theirs. Still, when you walk these halls, you cannot help but feel the prisoners watching you, measuring you, waiting to see what kind of jailer you will become. You are new, and they know it instantly. Prisoners have a sixth sense for newcomers, for weakness. They observe everything: your gait, your posture, how you flinch at the sudden clang of a door. They stare openly, silently, some with curiosity, others with the cold indifference of people who have seen 100 guards come and go. Their faces are marked by hunger, by bruises, by a kind of stillness that only comes from sitting in one place for too long. At first, you keep your head down and follow the routine. You deliver thin bowls of gruel, count the prisoners as they shuffle past you in the yard, and try not to meet their eyes. The other guards joke about you. They say you look pale, soft, like someone who has not seen a man beaten bloody or dragged by his ankles down the corridor. They say you will get used to it, or you will not, and you will leave, and no one will remember you at all. You try to remember their names, but there are too many, and most of them answer only to nicknames given by other prisoners: Rat, One Eye, Mother, the Priest. Some are young, shockingly young, their hands still soft and clumsy, their voices thin with fear. Others are old and bent, their eyes foggy, resigned to whatever punishment awaits. But all of them share the same look when they see you, an expression that is part challenge, part resignation. Will you be cruel? Will you be kind? It is all the same to them. Time erases everything except pain. A few days in, one of the older men, he is called Old Mare by the others, stops you as you pass his cell. His voice is rough, barely more than a whisper, but there is a strange confidence in the way he holds your gaze. You are not from here, he says, and you do not know whether he means the town, the prison, or this life in general. You nod, unsure how to respond. He gives a small, crooked smile. None of us are. Not really. Then he turns away, as if you have failed some silent test. That is your first conversation with a prisoner, and it leaves you unsettled. After that, you start to hear stories from the others. They tell you things they do not tell the senior guards, fragments of their lives, complaints about the food, the cold, the way the doctor only visits when someone is already dying. Sometimes the stories are lies, attempts to gain favor or special treatment, but sometimes you think they just want to be heard. You notice that the prisoners have their own system, their own hidden rules. They pass notes in bread crusts, trade favors for a blanket or a bite of cheese. The strong prey on the weak, and you are told not to intervene unless it threatens the order of the prison. Sometimes, at night, you hear quiet weeping or the low, rhythmic chanting of prayers. In the mornings, you find fresh scratches on the walls, names carved by desperate hands, perhaps to be remembered, perhaps just to prove that someone was here. You learn not to ask questions. If a prisoner is missing a tooth or limps for a week, you do not mention it. If someone is suddenly quiet or keeps to the shadows, you avert your eyes. The prison is full of secrets, and the more you know, the more dangerous your job becomes. It is better, the older guards say, to see nothing and say less. And yet you cannot help but notice the humanity that clings to these men and women, battered though it is. One morning, you catch a glimpse of two prisoners sharing a laugh, real, unguarded laughter. It startles you. In that moment, the prison seems less like a tomb and more like a stage where people still try to play at life even as the walls close in. Another time, you see a woman tearing a piece from her only blanket to wrap around the foot of an injured cellmate. You are told to punish them for damaging property, but you do not have the heart. You begin to realize that the line between jailer and prisoner is thinner than you thought. The only real difference is the set of keys at your belt. You too are learning how to survive in this world, how to avoid trouble, how to manage the expectations of those above you and the resentments of those below. You are a stranger, yes, but with every passing day, you become more like them than you would ever admit. Still, you try to hold on to the idea that you are different. You wash your hands compulsively, scrubbing away the grime as if it will protect you from the rot that eats at everything in this place. You keep a letter from your mother folded in your breast pocket, reading it in the rare moments when you are alone. She writes about home, about the garden, about the small and gentle things you almost cannot believe ever existed. You cling to these memories, but they are fading, washed away by the gray of prison life. Sometimes you wonder what the prisoners say about you when you are not around. Do they call you soft? Do they imagine you are crueler than you seem? Do they even care? You think of old Mare's words, "You are not from here," and you realize that in time you will be. The prison has a way of claiming everyone, of turning strangers into ghosts, ghosts into shadows, shadows into nothing at all. It is only your third week, and already you feel it happening to you. No one tells you how fast it happens. One day, you are flinching at every sound, your stomach churning at every new stench, and then, suddenly, you realize you are no longer noticing the filth at all. The smells, the rotting straw, the mold, the ever present tang of sweat become the air you breathe. The groans and shouts fade into background noise, the rhythm of metal against stone, a lullaby that follows you into sleep. You adapt because you have no choice. At first, you clean your hands every hour. You bring a sliver of lye soap from home, hoping to scrub away the prison with every wash. Soon, you forget the soap on a windowsill and never bother to bring it back. Your hands grow rough, chapped, calloused. Your skin is marked by tiny cuts from rough keys and rusted locks. The filth settles on you, slow and inexorable, until you cannot remember what it was like to feel truly clean. You begin to notice the way the world outside shrinks and the world inside expands. There is a strange comfort in the routine. The clang of the morning bell, the hollow footsteps echoing along the corridor, the hiss of water poured into wooden bowls. You move on autopilot. You find your place, your own particular pattern of steps between cells, your own rhythm of glancing left and right, your own strategies for keeping the peace. It is not peace, really. It is simply the absence of screaming. You remember, dimly, your first morning, the way your heart pounded when you saw the prisoners' faces peering through the bars. Now, they barely register. You recognize them by the shape of their hunched shoulders, the shuffle of their feet, the way they cough or spit or curse under their breath. You learn which ones are likely to lash out, which ones are most likely to beg, which ones simply endure. Their eyes do not follow you as much anymore. They have already measured you and found you predictable. With time, you begin to walk the corridors without fear. The flickering torchlight no longer unsettles you, and the whispers no longer sound like threats. You become part of the prison, just as the moss and the cracks in the stones are part of it. The building breathes with you, inhales as you open a door, exhales as you close it behind you. Sometimes you catch yourself thinking in the rhythms of the prison. Your thoughts grow clipped and methodical. You are always counting heads, keys, hours until the next meal. It is as if the walls are drawing you into their own way of thinking. You start to speak less. There is no one you trust among the guards, and speaking to the prisoners is always a risk. Instead, you find yourself muttering under your breath, reciting the same words every morning as if in prayer. Sometimes you catch a phrase, a sentence, echoing back from the darkness, and you wonder if it is your voice or someone else's. The guards who have worked here longer move with a certain indifference that borders on contempt. They do not hurry. Nothing here is urgent except an escape, and even that is more of an inconvenience than a crisis. You watch them, and slowly, unwillingly, you learn when to shout, when to keep silent, when to use your fists, when to look the other way. You hate the way it comes naturally, how quickly you fall into their patterns. The filth becomes part of you, but so does the cruelty. The first time you see a prisoner beaten, you feel a hot flush of shame, but you do nothing. Later, you realize you are no longer blushing. You see it, you hear it, you walk past. You tell yourself it is not your job to intervene, and after a while, you believe it. The line between right and wrong blurs so gradually that you cannot pinpoint the moment when you stopped caring. Yet there are moments when something sharp cuts through your apathy. A prisoner's desperate plea, a sudden scream in the night, a glimpse of blood smeared along a wall. You pause, heart thudding, but then you move on. You always move on. You tell yourself this is what must be done. There are days when the outside world slips into your thoughts uninvited. The memory of sunlight, the sound of a bird, the taste of something fresh. You push these thoughts away. They are dangerous. The more you remember of life outside, the harder it is to endure life inside. Better to let the prison swallow you whole, to let it become your world. The food is a source of endless complaint. You dole out the bread and thin soup, watching the prisoners fight over every crumb. You learn to eat quickly, standing by the kitchen door, never sitting, never looking anyone in the eye. The cooks are as bitter as the broth they serve, and the rats are their only real competitors for the best scraps. You no longer gag at the taste of moldy cheese or water tainted by rust. Your stomach has toughened, your standards have dropped. You survive, your sleep is shallow and restless. Every sound wakes you. You dream of corridors, of endless doors, of running and never finding the exit. You wake with your heart pounding, your fists clenched. The dreams fade, but the unease lingers. You cannot remember the last time you slept through the night. You adapt to the cold, to the noise, to the constant vigilance. You adapt to the knowledge that the prisoners are watching, always watching, waiting for a mistake. You adapt to the suspicion that grows between you and the other guards. You adapt to the knowledge that no one here is safe, least of all you. After a few months, you look in the polished metal shard that serves as a mirror. Your eyes are different, duller, older. You wonder how long it will take before you forget who you were before you came here. You tell yourself you are just doing your job. You tell yourself you have no choice. You tell yourself this is normal, that everyone adapts eventually. And you are right. You adapt. You all do. That is the tragedy. You imagine, before you take the job, that being a jailer means standing guard, eyes keen for signs of trouble, hand ready on a club. Perhaps you think of stories. The brave sentry fending off desperate escape attempts, the keen observer unraveling plots, the strict but fair arbiter of justice among thieves. The reality, however, is both duller and much darker. The truth is this: your days are ruled by the clock, but not the kind that chimes in a manor house. Here, the only clocks are the bells for meals and the lengthening of shadows in the courtyard. Every day is a repeat of the last, and every hour is filled with the same grinding rituals. You rise before dawn, your head already pounding from the chill and the sleeplessness. The corridors are icy, breath curling from your mouth in faint white plumes. You check your ring of keys, heavy as a shackle, and step into your rounds. Your first task is the morning roll call. You walk from cell to cell, rapping on the doors, listening for grunts or shuffles, sometimes waiting until the occupant finally moves enough to prove he is still breathing. If a prisoner does not answer, you call for another guard, and together you brace yourself for whatever you might find: a body curled in the straw, a fevered man raving, or, worse, silence and the smell of something rotting. Each day, you hope for the best and expect the worst. After roll call comes the morning meal. You open the doors one by one and hand in the bowls, thin gruel, a crust of bread if you are lucky. Some prisoners snatch the food with shaking hands, wolfing it down as if you might snatch it back. Others glare at you, their faces pinched and resentful, as though you have personally cooked this misery for them. Once, a prisoner throws the bowl back through the bars, spattering your tunic. You are supposed to beat him, but you just wipe the mess from your sleeve and move on. You are too tired to be angry. The rest of the day stretches out like an endless corridor. You patrol the walkways, eyes flicking over faces and hands, looking for trouble. You break up arguments over scraps of food or the sharing of blankets. You listen for rumors about escape plans, about fights, about the guard who disappeared last month and never returned. You know that even the smallest spark can set this place ablaze, and it is your job to snuff out every ember before it grows. Once a day, you escort prisoners to the yard, a patch of hard earth surrounded by a wall even higher than the rest. Here, for a brief moment, they see the sky. Some stand and stare upward, mouths open, as if they have forgotten how vast the world is. Others pace restlessly, their eyes always on the guards, waiting for any sign of weakness. You stand by the gate, club in hand, and count the heads again and again. You tell yourself you are here for order, but the truth is you are here because you are just as afraid as they are. If something goes wrong, you will be blamed first. You spend a great deal of time watching and an equal amount of time waiting, waiting for the next meal, the next count, the next incident. Sometimes you are called to the infirmary to help restrain a prisoner driven mad by fever or hunger. Sometimes you are sent to fetch the priest, though you wonder what comfort he could offer in this place. Sometimes you are told to stand watch outside the warden's office, pretending not to hear the cries coming from inside. Discipline is a regular part of your day. When a prisoner breaks a rule, stealing, fighting, shouting after hours, you are expected to act. Sometimes it means dragging a man to solitary, where the walls are closer and the dark thicker than anywhere else. Sometimes it means doling out beatings. At first, you swing your club hesitantly, sickened by the sound it makes against flesh. Over time, your arm becomes steadier, your stomach less queasy. You convince yourself that you are only following orders, that this is the way things must be. You are also responsible for keeping the peace among the guards, though this is nearly as difficult as managing the prisoners. Rivalries fester, old grudges resurface, and men who live surrounded by misery grow cruel and suspicious. You learn quickly whom to trust and whom to avoid. There are those who laugh too easily, whose eyes are always watching. There are those who joke about the prisoners in ways that make your skin crawl. You keep to yourself as much as you can. As the day wears on, fatigue settles in your bones. You check and recheck the locks, trying to ignore the constant itch at the back of your mind. The fear that you have missed something, that one of the doors is not as secure as you believe. The consequences of failure are severe for everyone. A successful escape means humiliation, punishment, maybe worse. You do not dwell on it. In the evenings, you supervise another meal, another roll call. The light from the torches flickers, throwing grotesque shadows on the walls. You see faces you recognize, and a few you wish you did not. You listen for coughing, for weeping, for the sound of quiet plodding in the corners. You are expected to report anything suspicious, but you know better than to speak too freely. Words have a way of turning back on you in this place. Before sleep, such as it is, you write your notes for the warden. You record incidents, names, punishments. You leave out the details that would trouble your own conscience, as everyone does. You wonder if anyone even reads these reports. Maybe they are just a ritual, like so much else in the prison, a way to keep you busy and convince you that what you do matters. Your day ends as it began, alone in the darkness, listening to the distant clatter of chains and the ceaseless drip of water from the ceiling. You undress quickly, pulling your blanket tight, willing yourself to forget. You do not dream, not anymore. The prison has taken that from you too, and tomorrow you will do it all again. Not because you want to, but because you must. Because you are the jailer, and this is your life now. You soon realize that the prison is a place not only of bodies, but of memories. Old, broken, persistent memories that drift through the corridors like dust motes in stale light. You cannot escape them. Sometimes you barely notice you are breathing them in, carrying them with you, letting them settle on your own bones. There are young men here, yes, and women barely more than girls, but it is the elderly prisoners who haunt you most. They move like ghosts, shadows wrapped in filthy rags, their steps slow and uncertain, their eyes glassy and inward looking, as if forever measuring the distance to some vanished home. It is hard to say how long some of them have been here. Time in the prison loses its shape. Some of the older prisoners arrived in youth and never left. Others were cast in when their bodies had already begun to crumble. You see them hunched over in corners, cradling aching joints, blinking at the world as if they can scarcely believe it still exists. There is no dignity in age here. Arthritis, missing teeth, and failing eyes are only further reasons for others to prey upon them. You watch the younger inmates jostle past them, snatch food from shaking hands, mock their mutterings. It is not kindness that rules these halls, and even less respect. The old men and women are mostly quiet, resigned to their fate, but sometimes their silence cracks. When the nights are long and sleep impossible, you hear their voices threading through the darkness, low, tired, and oddly intimate. They tell stories, not to you, not to anyone in particular, but simply because there is nothing else to do. The past becomes their last possession, a treasure clutched close against the gnawing cold. You do not ask for their tales, but you cannot help but listen. There is old Mare who has been here since before you were born, or so the others claim. He likes to recall the time the river flooded and the town was forced to bring all the livestock into the church. He laughs, a harsh and wheezing sound, about the bishop slipping on pig dung during the service, about the scandal that followed. Sometimes, in the haze between waking and sleep, you find yourself almost believing that somewhere outside these walls, a world once existed where the greatest worry was a muddy floor. Then there is Widow Magda, a woman with a voice like splintered wood and hands so twisted by age and cold that she can barely feed herself. She rarely speaks, but when she does, her stories are sharp as broken glass. The year of the great famine, the burning of the harvest, the night her youngest child died of fever. She talks as if she is carving each word into stone, and you feel each one settle like a pebble in your gut. Sometimes the stories take on a rhythm, a chant, half lullaby, half warning. One toothless man recites the names of every jailer he has ever seen, a litany that stretches back farther than your own memory will ever reach. Another speaks only of the taste of roast goose, the sound of a lute, the feel of a woman's hair, details so vivid that for a moment you are outside the prison too, if only in imagination. But always, the stories circle back to the same themes: loss, hunger, fear, and the slow grind of years spent staring at the same damp walls. The guards sneer at the old prisoners, call them relics, say they are too broken to bother with. But you begin to see the elderly not as burdens, but as living reminders. Each shuffle, each cough is a lesson in how the prison grinds a person down, wears away hope until nothing remains but habit and memory. You watch as they line up for meals, bodies bent double, and you wonder if this is what awaits everyone here, guards and prisoners alike. You tell yourself you are different, that you will not grow old in this place. But some mornings your joints ache in the cold, and you catch your reflection in a puddle and see only the same blank exhaustion in your eyes. Sometimes the stories become confessions. The old ones have little left to lose. In whispers, they recount the petty crimes, the accidents, the moments of rage or desperation that brought them here. The details change, but the ending is always the same: a cell, a cot, a world that no longer remembers their names. Some speak with bitterness, others with a kind of weary acceptance. The saddest, perhaps, are those who still maintain they were innocent, who cannot accept, after all these years, that this is their fate. You try not to get drawn in. The other guards warn you against it. Old fools, they say, trying to make you soft. But the words stick with you. You find yourself retelling their stories in your own head, changing the names, imagining what you would have done. Sometimes you catch yourself wishing for the kind of memory that could outlast the walls, the kind that would keep you whole even as your body failed. And so the days go on. The old prisoners shuffle through the routine, invisible except for the space they take up and the time they waste. You keep your distance as you are supposed to, but in the quiet moments, when the torches burn low and the world shrinks to the size of a single cell, you cannot help but listen. You cannot help but wonder if, one day, your own story will sound just as hollow, just as forgotten, and you realize, with a chill deeper than any draft, that in the prison, the past is not dead. It is just another thing that cannot escape. You think you are the one in control. That is how it is supposed to be, is it not? You carry the keys, you give the orders, you decide who leaves a cell and who stays locked away. You are the master of this house, the warden tells you, his voice echoing through the bare hallway. You hold all the power here. He says it as if it is a comfort, as if you should be proud. But the prison has a way of correcting such illusions. At first, you walk with a sense of authority. Each cell is a small world, and with a turn of your wrist, you can open it or shut it forever. The keys are heavy, dangling from your belt like badges of office, and the prisoners look at them the way a starving man looks at bread. You think perhaps that they are afraid of you, that your word means something, that you, unlike them, are free. But the longer you work, the more you sense the truth. The prison does not just contain the prisoners, it contains you. The walls that keep them from leaving keep you from living. Your world narrows to the endless maze of corridors, the locked doors, the echo of your own footsteps on flagstones slick with damp. There are no windows in most of the halls, only slits high above that let in a cold, uncertain light. The air is always stale, thick with the odors of mold, human waste, and something older, more rotten, a scent that clings to your skin and refuses to be washed away. You learn the geography of the place by heart. Each cell is like a mark on your palm, familiar and permanent. There is the cell where the roof leaks and the straw is always sodden, the one where the prisoner prays day and night, never speaking to anyone but God. The cell at the end of the hall that no one wants to enter because the man inside has gone, utterly mad and speaks only in riddles. The corridors wind and twist in ways that seem designed to confuse both guard and captive, and in the dark hours of the night, you sometimes lose your bearings, turning left instead of right, wondering for a moment if you will ever find your way back. The locks are temperamental, ancient iron things that resist your every effort. Sometimes you fight with them in the half light, your hands going numb in the cold, cursing under your breath, while the prisoners watch with silent amusement. Other times, a key turns so easily that you suspect a trick, and you spend the rest of your shift checking and rechecking the door to make sure it is truly secure. There are rituals for everything. You knock before opening, never trusting that a prisoner will not lash out in a moment of despair. You keep your back to the wall when you walk the corridors, eyes alert for sudden movement, even from those who seem too broken to cause trouble. You learn, by necessity, to recognize the sound of a body shifting in the straw, the whisper of a plan hatched in darkness, the creak of a board that might conceal a stolen spoon or a length of smuggled wire. The prison makes you vigilant, suspicious, always a little afraid, and yet you are also a servant. The prison is a beast that must be fed and cleaned and soothed, and you are only one of its many caretakers. You fetch water from the pump outside, your hands raw and stinging in the winter wind. You sweep the corridors, pushing the muck and refuse ahead of you, all the while wondering if it will ever be clean. You haul bodies, sometimes living, sometimes not, from cell to infirmary, from infirmary to grave. The warden may call you a master, but you know you are just as chained as any inmate, only your shackles are invisible and voluntary. Sometimes you envy the prisoners. Their world is small, but so is yours. They know exactly what to expect from each day, how much food, how little comfort, how slow the passage of time. Your days are not much different, except that you are expected to pretend they are. You must feign interest when the warden gives his speeches, feign contempt when a new prisoner weeps, feign strength when you feel anything but. The prisoners watch you just as you watch them. They see your fatigue, your frustration, the way your hands tremble after a long shift. Some even pity you, though they would never say it aloud. The worst are the nights. The prison seems to expand in the darkness, the corridors stretching longer, the shadows growing deeper. Every sound is amplified, the scraping of a bowl, the soft whimper of a sick man, the metallic clang of a distant gate. You carry a lantern, the flame barely enough to pierce the gloom, and every step feels like a step further from the world you once knew. You have seen men break during the night, both prisoners and guards alike. Some talk to themselves, others sing, some simply curl up in a corner and refuse to move. You understand why. The darkness is not just a lack of light, but a presence, a weight pressing down on everyone and everything. Sometimes you dream of escape, not for the prisoners, but for yourself. You imagine walking out the main gate, never looking back. You imagine what it would be like to breathe fresh air, to sleep in a bed that is truly yours. But you wake up every morning in the same cramped room, your back aching, your mouth dry, the taste of prison thick on your tongue. The truth is simple. You are not the master here. The prison is. It governs your every move, dictates your every action. You are as bound by its rules and rituals as the men and women you guard. The only difference is the key at your waist, and some days you wonder if that is a blessing or a curse. By now, you understand that there is no true authority here. There is only endurance. The prison will outlast you as it outlasts everyone. It will swallow your hopes, your pride, even your sense of self, until all that remains is the routine, the endless trudge from cell to corridor to cell again. You are the jailer. You are also the jailed. And in the end, it hardly matters which side of the bars you started on. You think you know misery until you have watched a prisoner starve. There is a kind of hunger in this place that is more than just an ache in the belly. It eats at the mind, gnaws at the soul, dulls even the brightest hope to a stubborn, twitching ember. You see it every day in the eyes of the men and women behind the bars. The hollow, restless look of someone who has lost the ability to dream of anything beyond the next crust of bread. Fear, hunger, and hopelessness are the three pillars upon which this world is built. The prisoners wake up cold, shivering in damp straw, the rags they wear clinging to bodies that are all bone and bruise. The first thing they do is count the days, count the minutes, count the scraps left from the meal before. There is never enough. The bread is stale, shot through with mold. The gruel is thin as dirty water. The cheese, if it comes at all, is a rare and precious thing, quickly stolen, quickly gone. You have seen grown men fight over a chunk no bigger than a coin. You have watched a woman weep when her dinner was snatched away by a stronger hand. Sometimes you wonder if you would do any differently in their place. Fear is everywhere. It comes from the guards, yourself included, and from the prisoners themselves. There is a hierarchy in the cells that is more ruthless than anything you can impose from outside. The strong dominate the weak, the desperate prey on the sick, and kindness is as rare as sunlight. Every favor comes with a price. Every word might be a trap. The wrong look, the wrong whisper, the wrong ally can mean a week in solitary or a night of bruises that never heal right. You keep order, but you cannot keep the prisoners safe from each other. Not really. There are places in the prison even you do not like to go. Nooks where the shadows seem to swallow the light. Corners where too many secrets have piled up. Hopelessness is the final, all consuming constant. It settles on the prisoner's shoulders like dust, thick and suffocating. You see it in the way they move, slowly, methodically, without any spark of urgency. They have all learned that hope is a dangerous thing. It sets you up for disappointment, makes you a target, turns you inward until there is nothing left but regret and longing. Some of them still count the days until their supposed release, scratching marks into the walls until their fingers bleed. Others have stopped altogether. The oldest prisoners talk about freedom the way children talk about fairy tales, as something distant and unbelievable meant for other people. The prisoners do not trust you. Why should they? You are the one with the keys, the one who tells them when to eat, when to sleep, when to huddle in the yard under the gray, indifferent sky. You try, some days, to meet them halfway. You offer a kind word, a bit of extra bread, a second blanket if you can spare it. Sometimes you are met with suspicion. More often, you are ignored. There is no room for gratitude in a place like this. Every kindness comes with a price, or so they have learned, and you cannot blame them for expecting the worst. Disease runs rampant, carried by rats and carried by men. There is always coughing, always the sick, sweet smell of fever. You do not keep track of who dies and who merely fades away. New faces arrive, old ones vanish, and the routine grinds on. When someone collapses, you drag them to the infirmary where the doctor might see them or might not. Most times, a short prayer is all that marks the end. The bodies are buried outside the walls in unmarked graves. No one asks after them. No one mourns for long. Still, there are moments that break through the gloom. You catch a glimpse of a mother braiding her daughter's hair, fingers deft even in the cold. Two old friends share a joke in a language you do not understand, and for a heartbeat, the walls seem less close. But these are brief, flickering things. More often, you see the ways in which despair reshapes a person, how laughter becomes bitter, how dreams shrivel to nothing, how even love is bartered away for a crust of bread or a warm place by the stove. Sometimes you wonder if hopelessness is the prison's most effective punishment. It does not leave marks, but it hollows from the inside out. It makes the prisoners docile, yes, but it also makes them less than human. It is not uncommon to see a prisoner stare at the wall for hours, unmoving, as if the world has finally faded to gray and all that is left is waiting. You begin to understand why some choose to provoke the guards, to earn a beating or a spell in solitary. Pain, after all, is something. It reminds you that you are alive. For some, the only escape is madness. You have seen it take root, a muttered conversation with invisible friends, a sudden scream in the night, a man who tears at his own flesh just to feel something. The other prisoners look away, afraid as much of catching the madness as they are of catching a fever. You see the way their eyes follow you as you pass. You wonder what they see. Do they think you are immune? Do they imagine you sleep soundly at night, untouched by fear, hunger, or despair? The joke, of course, is on both of you. The walls are as much your world as theirs, and the longer you stay, the more you understand. You are all prisoners, in one way or another. You tell yourself it is not your job to care. You remind yourself that you did not build these walls, that you are only keeping order, only following rules. But the faces blur together in your dreams, and some nights you wake to the echo of hopelessness in your own heart. The prison does not just punish the guilty, it consumes the living, slowly, patiently, without mercy. There is a particular silence in the torture chamber, not the silence of peace, not even the hush that falls before dawn in the cell blocks, but a thicker, oilier quiet, a kind that sticks to your tongue and makes you forget words altogether. You do not like to enter this room. You do not like what it does to you, but you do it because you are told to, and because everyone else does, and because eventually you stop asking yourself why. It is not always violence. That is the first thing you learn. There are 1,000 ways to break a person, and most of them do not draw blood. Deprivation, humiliation, sleep stolen an hour at a time. A prisoner spends 3 days and 3 nights standing in the corner of his cell, knees shaking, eyelids heavy, and you are the one who stands outside the door, making sure he does not collapse. Sometimes you are told to empty the slop bucket only halfway, to let the stink build up until the air is thick enough to chew. Other times, you simply make them wait. Wait for water, wait for news, wait for anything at all. But violence is a tool, and it is used often. There is the cane and the club, the rope and the whip. Sometimes the warden himself watches, standing in the doorway with arms folded, face blank. The older guards seem to relish these moments. They know just where to strike, just how much to hurt without killing. You watch, at first, with a mixture of revulsion and fascination. You wonder if you could do it, if your arm would steady, if your voice would stay calm. You do not wonder for long. One day, the warden hands you a rod and points to a man shackled to the wall. He bit a guard, the warden says. Make an example. You hesitate, but only for a heartbeat. You bring the rod down, not too hard, not too soft. The man grunts, then cries out, but you keep going. Your own breathing is louder than the sound of the blows. Afterward, you tell yourself you had no choice, that it was necessary, that if you had refused, the punishment would have been worse. You repeat these things as you wash the blood from your hands. You do not sleep well that night. The worst part is how quickly it becomes routine. At first, every session is a test of your resolve, your stomach, your sense of self. You catch yourself flinching at the crack of the whip, the dull thud of fist against flesh. You try to avoid the eyes of the prisoner. Too much pain, too much pleading, too much like looking into a mirror. But as the weeks pass, the sharp edge dulls. Your arm grows accustomed to the motion. You develop a method. You learn to strike where bruises do not show, to use words as weapons, to draw out fear until it is thicker than blood. Sometimes the prisoner faints. Sometimes they curse you. Sometimes they beg. The begging is always the worst. There are times when you almost wish for a different job, one that would let you fix roofs, or till the fields, or even dig graves. Anything but this. You envy the guards who seem not to feel a thing, who whistle as they leave the chamber, who joke about the broken fingers and the missing teeth. You do not join in their laughter. You suspect you never will.
And once yet,
There are moments when you sense a strange, guilty relief. When a prisoner confesses, or a rumor is stamped out, or the violence seems to restore some kind of order. The warden praises you, pats you on the back, calls you dependable. The other guards nod approvingly. You wonder if they mean it, or if they are just glad it is not their turn. You accept the approval, but it tastes like ash. The prisoners know who the torturers are. They watch you with a particular kind of silence, eyes narrowed, mouths tight. You notice that they flinch when you walk past, that they avoid speaking when you are near. Some look at you with hatred, others with fear, a few with something close to pity. It is the pity that burns worst of all. They do not see a man, only a tool, an extension of the prison, of the law, of everything that has stripped them bare. Sometimes you wonder what happens when you leave this place, if you ever do. Will you carry the cell of the chamber with you, the stains on your hands? Will your neighbors notice the way you look away when someone cries out in pain? Will you ever forget the sound a man makes when he realizes he will not be forgiven, no matter how loud he begs? You tell yourself you had no choice. You were just following orders. You only did what everyone else did, what the prison demanded. But there is a part of you, small, stubborn, buried deep, that knows better. You are not innocent. No one here is. You close the door of the torture chamber behind you, and for a moment you feel lighter, almost clean. But the silence follows you down the corridor, clinging to your skin, your breath, your soul, and you know it will never truly leave. You think a doctor is a force for good. That is how it is in stories. Wise, gentle, maybe a bit cold, but ultimately on the side of the living. In prison, the doctor is more complicated, more ambiguous, and much less comforting than you hope. You learn early that you cannot trust the prison doctor any more than you trust the guards or the prisoners. His tools are sharp and clean, but his hands are just as dirty as yours. The doctor is a thin man, pale as flour, with a pair of spectacles that always seem on the verge of sliding off his nose. His coat is perpetually stained. He carries a bag that rattles with mysterious glass vials and reeking poultices. Some say he is a disgraced surgeon, run out of the city for some scandal best left unspoken. Others say he was never a real doctor at all. It does not matter. He is the only healer you have, and he knows it. You see the prisoners tense when he enters a cell. The bravest flinch. Some try to hide their wounds for as long as possible, enduring agony in silence rather than admit weakness. There are rumors, always whispered, that the doctor keeps a list of names for the warden, that he decides who will get medicine and who will be left to rot. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps it is only paranoia. Either way, you have seen men walk out of the infirmary worse than when they entered. The infirmary is a cold, cramped room tucked away from the main corridors, as if the building itself is ashamed of it. The straw on the cots is always damp. The air smells of spoiled broth and old wounds. You are sent here often, dragging or carrying prisoners who have collapsed, who cough up blood, who shake with fever or chills. Sometimes they live, sometimes they die, sometimes it makes no difference at all. The doctor sighs and mutters, pokes and prods, and sometimes shrugs as if it is all a bother. He has his favorites, of course, the strong, the useful, the ones who might be of value to the warden or the guards. You have seen him pour a bitter draught down a fighter's throat and stand by the bedside of a craftsman with a broken hand. He gives them real medicine, sometimes even a kind word. For the rest, there are dirty rags and hollow promises. He mumbles about nature taking its course, as if nature itself is the jailer and he is only here to watch. Some guards despise the doctor. They think he is too soft, that he wastes time on hopeless cases. Others rely on him, begging for remedies for their own coughs and sores. You know better than to expect kindness. When you go to him with a headache, he gives you a foul smelling powder and tells you to sleep it off. When you show him a festering cut, he douses it in vinegar, and you howl. He laughs and tells you pain means you are still alive. The prisoners know the price of medicine. Some barter with what little they have, an old coin, a secret, a favor. Some try to threaten or bribe. A few simply beg. The doctor chooses who to save and who to forget, and sometimes you wonder if it is the disease or the cure that frightens the inmates more. You try not to notice when a body is carted from the infirmary at dawn. There is a pit outside the walls where they all go, prisoners, sometimes guards. There are no prayers, only a shovel and the indifferent earth. The doctor marks something in his little book, shrugs, and returns to his rounds. There are always more patients. There is always more suffering. You suspect he likes it that way. You hear rumors among the prisoners, stories of the doctor's strange experiments, of prisoners who go in for a cough and come out with scars. Some say he uses them to test his potions, others that he sells the bodies to grave robbers for a few extra coins. The truth is less interesting, but no less grim. He is tired. He is bored. He is a part of the prison, another cog in the machine of pain and neglect. Once you catch the doctor in a rare moment of honesty. He tells you there is no healing here, only delaying the inevitable. His voice is flat, empty, as if he has repeated the phrase so many times it means nothing now. You nod because you understand. You are not here to heal anyone either. You are here to keep the order, to keep the prison moving, to keep the darkness at bay until your shift ends. The doctor is a warning, a reminder that trust is dangerous in a place like this. He does his job, you do yours, and neither of you pretends there is any meaning in it. You are all just trying to survive in your own way, hoping the rot does not spread too far, hoping the next sickness is not the one that takes you too. You see the doctor in the corridor one morning. his face as pale as ever, his eyes red rimmed with exhaustion. He nods, barely acknowledging your existence, and disappears into the gloom. You wonder if he is more prisoner than doctor, or more jailer than healer. In the end, it does not matter. In the end, the prison claims everyone. And so you move on, a little less certain, a little more cautious, always remembering that here, even medicine comes with a price. The yard is supposed to be a mercy. The warden says so. The priest mumbles it during his rare visits, and you even tell yourself some days that this patch of muddy ground is a kindness, a chance for the prisoners to stretch, to taste a hint of freedom under the sour sky. But you know better. The yard is nothing but another cage, a place where the sun can find the wretched as easily as the dark. At first light, you and a handful of guards unlock the gates. The iron groans in protest, as if the walls themselves resent the intrusion. Prisoners shuffle out in groups, herded like livestock, eyes half shut against the pale daylight. Some blink up at the clouds, as if remembering what it means to hope for weather. Most stare at their own feet, or at the cracks in the flagstones, determined to see nothing at all. Your job in the yard is simple: watch, count, stand ready. You lean against the wall, club at your side, eyes scanning the familiar faces. You do not relax. The yard is where tempers fray, where old grudges surface and new wounds are dealt. You have seen men thrown to the ground over a handful of crumbs, women pulling each other's hair out for a patch of dry earth to sit on. It is not your job to stop every scuffle. Intervention is reserved for blood or the threat of riot. Anything less is just the natural order asserting itself. There is a bench, warped by years of rain and neglect, reserved for the infirm or the very old. The rest must find their own space. The young cluster together, forming little knots of suspicion and bravado. The strong claim corners, backs to the wall. The weak hover at the margins, always glancing over their shoulders, waiting for someone bigger to notice their presence. You see the same patterns play out day after day, as inevitable as the weather. Sometimes the prisoners try to make the yard more than it is. They draw lines in the dirt for games, or trade stories in low voices, or just sit in circles, sharing whatever comfort can be found. You watch from a distance, arms folded, pretending not to hear laughter, pretending not to care when someone manages to smuggle in a tune on a homemade flute. These moments never last. A shout, a shove, a guard's bark, and the peace shatters into the usual scrabbling desperation. You learn to avert your eyes from certain things. From the prisoner who picks at a fresh wound, testing how deep the pone can go. From the woman who stands at the wall, facing away from everyone, shoulders shaking in silent sobs. From the old man who seems to have forgotten, once again, where he is, wandering in slow circles until a guard leads him gently back inside. The yard is a stage for humiliation as much as for relief. You see hunger here, raw, animal, unfiltered by any pretense of dignity. The prisoners beg, barter, steal. They fall and sometimes do not get back up until the bell rings for return. And all the while, the walls watch. Moss creeps between the stones, birds nest high above, out of reach, as if even the smallest living thing knows to stay clear. The sky is gray more often than not. When it rains, the yard becomes a pit of sucking mud, and the prisoners are forced to shuffle in place, hunched and miserable. When the sun appears, the guards squint and sweat, and the prisoners retreat to the thin strips of shade that the walls grudgingly provide. The priest comes sometimes, clutching his tattered Bible, voice drowned out by the clatter and mutter of the crowd. He offers blessings, a quick prayer, maybe a crust of bread to the most desperate. You watch him with a mixture of pity and disdain. His words mean nothing here. The yard swallows his hopes the way it swallows laughter and light. You keep your distance, your back to the wall, eyes never lingering too long on any one group. You know better than to trust the stillness. The yard is always ready to erupt. Old wounds fester here, unspoken grievances bubble just below the surface. When a fight does break out, it is sudden and savage. You wade in with your club, swinging with just enough force to remind them who is in charge. You do not take pleasure in it, but you do not hesitate either. The others watch, memorizing every blow, every show of weakness. Power is fragile here. Respect is earned in bruises. At the end of the hour, you ring the bell, call the names, herd the prisoners back inside. The yard empties quickly, as if the walls themselves are pulling everyone back into darkness. Muddy footprints are left behind, proof that someone was here, that someone tried to stand in the sun for a few minutes longer. You lock the gates, check your keys, glance up at the blank sky. You tell yourself it is over for the day, that you have done your duty. But you know the yard waits for you, just as it waits for them. Tomorrow it will open its mouth again, and you will stand guard, and the same tired drama will unfold. The yard is no mercy. It is simply another place to learn how little you are willing to see. Reform comes to the prison now and then, or at least the rumor of it does. The word itself trickles through the corridors like a draft, cold, untrustworthy, carrying more dread than hope. Reform, they say. The magistrates in the city are displeased. The bishop has spoken out. The new warden is said to have modern ideas. You hear all this, just as you hear the prisoners whisper about the coming of spring or the return of bread with no weevils. You know better than to expect either. The first sign of reform is usually a visit, a clutch of dignitaries in crisp coats, trailing clerks with ink-stained fingers, their noses wrinkled as they enter the gate. They peer around as if expecting a menagerie, careful not to touch anything, eyes narrowed against the smell. The warden leads them on a tour, his boots freshly shined for the occasion, his voice booming with pride as he points out whatever part of the prison has been cleaned for their arrival. If you are unlucky, you are told to stand at attention, silent and stony, while they ask questions you know not to answer. Are the prisoners well fed? Asks one. The warden beams. They are given bread and gruel daily, sir, as per the regulations. Are punishments fair and just? Another inquires. The law is strictly followed, the warden assures her, and his smile is wide and white and utterly false. You watch as the visitors nod, making notes in their little books. Occasionally, they ask to see the kitchen, the infirmary, even a cell or two. But the tour is always brief, the filthiest corners unseen, the worst cases hidden until the dignitaries are back in their carriages congratulating themselves on their charity. Afterward, you and the other guards are gathered in the yard and given a speech about progress. Change is coming, the warden says. The world is watching. We must be better. He looks at you as if daring you to disagree. No one does. Sometimes changes do appear. The gruel is slightly thicker for a week. The straw is replaced in the oldest cells. The doctor is given a new bottle of medicine, though you suspect it is only colored water. The rules are rewritten and nailed to the walls. No beatings without cause. No food withheld for minor offenses. No more than 3 days in solitary. You memorize them as you are told, and then you watch as nothing changes at all. The prisoners are not fooled. They have lived through reform before. They have seen the slogans painted on the gates, the promises whispered from pulpit and bench. Some laugh when they hear of the new rules. Some grow sullen, suspecting a trick. Most simply shrug and keep their eyes on the floor. Hope is dangerous, they have learned, and it always comes with a price. The guards are worse. Some grow nervous, suddenly anxious to hide their cruelty, to tidy up old bruises, to practice their smiles. Others scoff openly, betting on how long it will take before things return to normal. You find yourself in between, cynical, but not quite resigned, watching the charade unfold and wondering if you are expected to believe it. For a time, there is a brief and uneasy truce. The worst punishments are suspended, the food improves. The infirm are treated with something like care. The warden walks the corridors more often, his eyes everywhere, his voice sharp as a whip, but the pressure cannot last. Soon enough, a prisoner fights back, or a guard loses his temper, or the bread arrives full of worms, and the old order returns with a vengeance. The rules are forgotten, the speeches fade, and the routines settle back into their familiar, grinding pattern. Now and then, the authorities send a new man to take charge, a reformer full of talk about rehabilitation and Christian mercy. He lasts a few months, maybe a year. He tries to separate the violent from the meek, to establish lessons or prayers or even music in the yard. You watch as he grows gaunt and hollow-eyed, his optimism worn down by the endless, daily tide of filth and misery. One morning, he is simply gone, replaced by another warden whose smile is less bright and whose eyes are cold as the stone walls. The prisoners learn quickly. If they complain, the punishments return. If they hope, disappointment follows. The guards watch and wait, betting among themselves on which reform will vanish first. The extra blanket, the thicker soup, the ban on midnight beatings. You lose track after a while. You think about reform sometimes when you are lying awake in your narrow bed, listening to the rats scratch at the floor. You wonder if the world outside is really any different, or if change is just another story told by those who never have to live with its consequences. The walls are unchanged, the locks grow rustier, the straw moldier, the faces more worn. Hope is a fleeting guest in this place. The prison knows how to wait out any reformer, how to grind down any new law. The stone is patient, and the stone always wins. Reform is not a cure, only another kind of fever, a brief, burning flush before the sickness returns, worse than before. You watch it happen again and again, and you know in your heart that nothing here is ever truly new. And still, when the next visitor comes, you polish your boots, straighten your tunic, and stand at attention. The world must believe in reform, even if you no longer do. You would think, looking at the sullen faces behind the bars, that a prison is nothing but a place of rules, a world of fixed schedules, iron laws, and the steady hand of the jailer. You would be wrong. The prison, in truth, is a world with its own twisted culture, as complex and ancient as any kingdom, ruled not by justice, but by fear and the ever shifting tides of power. You see it everywhere, once you learn where to look. Fear is the first language spoken here, older than the stone, more constant than the damp. It seeps into every corner, shapes every gesture. It is there in the way a prisoner keeps his back to the wall, in the way a group falls silent when a certain man passes by, in the way the smallest theft is punished with savage retribution, not from the guards, but from the prisoners themselves. No one trusts, not really. Trust is a tool, a weapon, a mask to be worn when needed and discarded when it is not. There is hierarchy everywhere. The guards like to think they sit at the top, but that is only half true. You hold the keys, yes, and the club, and sometimes even the fate of a man's body in your hands. But power inside these walls is a currency traded in secrets and favors, not uniforms. There are prisoners with influence, old timers who know which guard to bribe, which rules can be bent, which whispers will travel the farthest. You learn quickly that to ignore these men is to court trouble. Some have hidden networks that stretch through every cell, every supply room, every kitchen cupboard. Information is bought and sold here more eagerly than bread. Fear binds everyone. It is not just the prisoners who flinch at a sudden shout or a heavy step in the corridor. The guards, too, are careful, watching one another as closely as they watch the condemned. You see it in the way a young guard copies the sneer of his senior, desperate to be counted among the strong. You see it when the warden's voice rises and no one dares to meet his gaze. Power is always moving, always uncertain, and so everyone must cling to whatever scraps of authority they can gather. Rituals bloom in this dark soil. Each morning, The prisoners jostle for position in the food line, each step a test, a performance. The way a bowl is held, the order of a cue, who sits where and with whom. Every detail is a clue to the real structure of things. There are signs you learn to read if you wish to survive. A hand hidden in a sleeve, a cough at the wrong moment, a sudden hush as you pass. When you were new, you missed them all. Now, they seem as obvious as shouts. There are codes of silence, of honor, of vengeance. Some prisoners refuse to speak to guards, no matter the punishment. Others volunteer information, carefully, always for a price. You learn that even among the most desperate, there are those who cannot be broken by threats, and those who will sell a neighbor for half a slice of bread. Betrayal is not a shame here, only another form of survival. Yesterday's enemy may be today's ally, tomorrow's victim. It is all a matter of who holds the upper hand. You find, over time, that the boundaries between us and them are more blurred than you care to admit. The guards form their own cliques, protect their own. Old feuds simmer, and minor slights are never forgotten. The strong prey on the weak here, too. Orders are sometimes given with a glance, a twitch of the mouth, a tightening of fingers on a club. When violence erupts, whether among prisoners or guards, it is sudden, ugly, and absolute. You learn the importance of reputation. The prisoners spread stories about you, what you will tolerate, what makes you angry, how hard you can hit, how long you hold a grudge. The stories are not at always true, but it does not matter. In the prison, perception is reality. You start to guard your own words, your own actions, knowing that any slip will be noted and remembered. It is exhausting. It is necessary. Above all, you see how fear is used as a tool, not just by the guards, but by the prisoners themselves. Threats are made and unmade in the dark, promises whispered in return for a scrap of food, a kind word, a moment of mercy. Even the doctor, the priest, the kitchen staff, they have their own systems, their own debts to pay. No one here is free of it. Sometimes you catch yourself mimicking the rituals, speaking the language of fear without thinking. You bark at a prisoner, not because you need to, but because you know it will prevent trouble. You turn a blind eye to a theft because you know who orchestrated it, and you do not want to make an enemy of someone with power. You laugh too loud at a cruel joke, aware of the eyes watching you from the shadows. There are moments when you feel the weight of it pressing down, heavy and inescapable. The fear is not only around you, it is inside you, shaping the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you sleep or fail to sleep at night. You tell yourself it is just a job, just another day, just another round of roll call and lock check. But you know, if you are honest, that the culture of the prison has become a part of you. In the end, this is the real lesson the prison teaches, that power and fear are two sides of the same worn coin, endlessly passed from hand to hand, never really owned by anyone for long. The walls do not care who is in charge. The darkness remembers every secret, every act of cruelty, every bargain struck in desperation. You cling to your keys, your club, your routines. You tell yourself you are the one in control. But in your heart, you know, in a world built on fear, no one is ever safe. They tell you it is part of your duty. You are not just a keeper of keys and a distributor of bread. You are, at times, a witness, an escort, a participant in what the law calls justice and what the prisoners call doom. The day of an execution is never announced with trumpets. Instead, it begins like any other: gray dawn, shivering bones, the rattle of the first lock, but you feel it in the tension, a subtle tightening of the air, a hush that falls over even the most quarrelsome. The warden receives the order first. Sometimes he reads it aloud to you, the words as formal and cold as the document itself. The name, the crime, the sentence. It does not matter if the words are true. If the guilt is certain, the law must be obeyed. The guards gather in the hall, faces set in masks of indifference or anticipation. Some are eager, hungry for the break in routine. Others, like you, dread what is coming and hope the day will end quickly. It is not always a hanging. Sometimes it is a flogging meant to kill, sometimes a limb removed, sometimes a slow death in the stocks, exposed to wind and rain. The method depends on the crime or the mood of the authorities, or, occasionally, the size of the crowd outside the gates. For some, execution is a spectacle, a lesson to the rest. For others, it is merely paperwork, another box to be checked before supper. You are told to fetch the condemned. You find them in their cell, sometimes trembling, sometimes defiant, sometimes so empty they do not seem to notice you at all. You do not offer comfort. You do not speak their name. You do not want to remember them later in your dreams. You shackle their wrists and march them down the corridor, feeling the eyes of every other prisoner follow your every step. You are aware, acutely, of the role you play in this theater. You are not the judge, not the executioner, just the one who delivers the body to its fate. If there is a priest, he mumbles prayers, face pale and hands unsteady. The condemned might listen, or curse, or laugh. Once, you see a man spit at the feet of his confessor, daring God to take him sooner. Another time, a woman kneels and weeps, not for herself, but for a child somewhere beyond these walls. These moments are not heroic. There are no speeches, no last minute pardons. There is only the inevitability of what must happen next. The execution ground is a patch of earth at the edge of the yard, or a scaffold in the square, or a dark, cramped chamber where the only witness is the cold stone. The condemned are tied, positioned, displayed. Sometimes there is a crowd, other prisoners, townsfolk, even children peering through the gates. The guards keep order, clubs ready, eyes averted when they can be. You stand nearby, holding your breath, waiting for the signal. It is over quickly, usually. A body jerks, a voice cries out, sometimes loud, sometimes barely more than a whisper. Blood pools or trickles. The silence that follows is heavy, disturbed only by the cawing of birds. The crowd disperses. The warden signs the necessary papers. The body is carted away. If you are lucky, you do not recognize the face. If you are not, you remember it for the rest of your life. Afterward, you feel strange, sometimes relief, sometimes sickness, sometimes nothing at all. The other guards talk, making jokes or swapping stories, eager to prove that death is nothing new to them. You try to keep your distance, but the taste of iron lingers in your mouth, and you wonder if it ever truly fades. The prisoners react in their own ways. Some retreat into silence, staring at their hands as if they might find salvation in the lines of their palms. Others are emboldened, the promise of an end making them reckless. You know the signs: a sudden riot of noise, a hunger strike, a prayer meeting that draws too many together. The warden increases the patrols, tightens the rules, but the shadow of the execution lingers in every corridor, every cell. Death, once witnessed, cannot be forgotten. Sometimes the sentence is not death, but something slower, crueler, a lifetime of hard labor, exile to the mines, permanent branding. You see the condemned marched away, their heads bowed or held high in defiance. You wonder which is worse, a quick end or a slow fading in some other, darker place. You wonder, in moments you do not care to admit, whether you are witnessing punishment or just the machinery of cruelty turning as it always has. At night, you lie awake, replaying the scene in your mind. You remember the trembling hands, the last look, the way the air seemed to still just before the end. You tell yourself it is justice, that it keeps the peace, that it is what must be done. But the prison is never quiet after an execution. There are always echoes, whispers in the darkness, dreams that taste of blood and iron, memories that will not let you go. You are the jailer. You do what is required. You keep your eyes forward, your mouth shut, your heart hidden behind a wall thicker than any cell. But you know, as well as anyone, that every execution leaves a mark, not just on the condemned, but on everyone who remains behind. And so the cycle continues: sentence, execution, silence, waiting for the next name to be called. Holidays are not for you, not anymore. Not for the prisoners, not for the guards, not for anyone who spends their days within these walls. The world outside might celebrate the turning of the year, the harvest, the birth of a distant king, or the hope of a coming spring. There might be bells in the village and laughter from windows lit with firelight. But in the prison, holidays are just another mark on the endless calendar, a day that promises change and delivers only more of the same. The warden tries, sometimes. He announces that on holy days, the meals will be special, or that the prisoners may hear a hymn if the priest can be persuaded to visit. He might instruct the cook to salt the soup or toss in the bones of last week's chicken if any can be found. You receive your instructions. Smile more, Curse less, keep your uniform tidy. Make the place presentable for the Lord's mercy, as if mercy could find its way past stone and iron. The prisoners do not care. Some have lost track of time so thoroughly that the idea of a holiday is just a rumor, an old superstition that clings to them from before their imprisonment. Others count the days obsessively, not because they hope for anything different, but because it is one more thing to count, one more way to make sense of the passing of years. You have watched a man scratch notches into his cell wall for 5 years. Every line the same, every line a reminder that nothing ever really changes. On feast days, there is a little more noise in the corridors. Someone tries to sing, voice cracking in the damp air. An old woman whispers a prayer over a bowl of gruel. The cook, perhaps feeling charitable, or perhaps just bored, sprinkles a handful of dried herbs over the bread. For a moment, the smell almost reminds you of something better, but the taste is always the same: sour, rough, too little. Winter is the real holiday here, a season that arrives early and overstays its welcome. It begins with a creeping chill in the floors, the stone leaching warmth from your feet. The windows, never much use for keeping out the wind, grow slick with frost. Your breath fogs in the corridors. Blankets, thin to begin with, are hoarded and fought over. Prisoners huddle together for warmth, grudges and rivalries forgotten in the face of cold that bites as sharp as any club. There is never enough food in winter. The kitchen fires are kept low to save wood. The bread is smaller, the soup thinner, the cheese a memory. You ration your own meals, counting every crumb, every sliver of dried meat. The prisoners complain, louder now, their hunger making them reckless and desperate. Fights break out in the yard, in the line for food, even at night when most are too cold to move. You and the other guards are called to restore order with sticks and threats, but you are hungry too. Your patience, like your rations, grows short. The old and the weak suffer most. Each year, the same story plays out. A prisoner collapses in the yard. Another does not wake in the morning. The doctor shrugs, scribbles in his book, mutters about natural causes. There is no pity here, only the certainty that fewer mouths will need feeding. The warden frowns, but does nothing. It is the winter, he says, as if that explains everything. Outside, the villagers complain about the taxes that pay for the bread you hand out, never knowing there is no bread to spare. They hang wreaths on their doors and pray for a mild season, never guessing how cold it gets inside the prison, how hunger gnaws at flesh and bone. You think of the world beyond the walls, the sound of bells, the taste of hot stew, the warmth of a fire. You remember your own childhood, the stories told by candlelight, the way your mother would tuck an extra blanket around your shoulders. That world feels further away every year. Sometimes the priest comes, his own cloak patched and thin. He recites the same prayers, hands out a crust of bread or a word of comfort. Some prisoners listen, desperate for any scrap of hope. Others turn away, hollow eyed, no longer willing to pretend that faith or mercy can warm them. You stand by, arms folded, trying to keep your own cynicism hidden. Even the priest leaves quickly in winter. The holidays pass, unnoticed, but for the increase in hunger, the rise in tempers, the number of empty cots in the morning, the guards gather in the kitchen, telling grim jokes, trading stories of winters past, counting the days until the thaw. There are no gifts, no celebrations. The only relief comes when the first shoots of green appears outside the walls, when the ice melts and the bread grows a little less stale, but the memories of each starving winter linger. You mark the seasons not by feasts or festivals, but by losses. Who survived? Who did not? How many shivered through another year? You learn not to expect kindness, not from the warden, not from the world, not even from yourself. You learn that hope is the first thing to freeze and the last thing to thaw. And so the holidays come and go. Winter arrives and stays. You are still in prison, just like everyone else. The world outside turns, indifferent, and you endure, waiting for something, anything, to change. Freedom is the only hope worth clinging to, the fragile dream that glimmers in every prisoner's eyes, at least in the early days. You see it first in the newly condemned, the way they stare at the bars as if they might dissolve under a determined gaze, the way they talk about family, plans, the life waiting for them outside. Some keep this hope burning for years. Most let it die, quietly, like a candle starved of air. Release is a rare thing in the prison. It comes with no warning, no ceremony, often no joy. One morning, a name is called, a door is unlocked, a bundle of rags is handed over, the prisoner's only possessions rolled into a filthy scrap of cloth. Sometimes there is paperwork, a grim faced clerk shuffling through parchments, muttering about signatures and seals. More often, there is just a nod from the warden and a gesture toward the gates. Go on then. It is less an act of mercy and more an act of clearing out clutter. You have watched men and women cross that threshold. You have seen their faces, pale and drawn, eyes wide with disbelief. There is no triumphant music, no grateful tears, just uncertainty and a kind of exhaustion that clings to the skin. Some hesitate, looking back over their shoulder as if expecting to be called back for some final punishment. Others walk stiffly, clutching their bundle, shivering in the sudden, unfamiliar light. You used to think that release was a happy ending. That is what the stories say, what the law intends. A man serves his time, pays his debt, and is made whole again. But the truth is more complicated. The world outside the gates is not waiting with open arms. There are no welcoming committees, no cheering crowds. More often than not, the released stand uncertain in the road, unsure where to go, their memories of home faded and threadbare. Some are met by family, though this is rare. A brother, a daughter, an old friend. These are the lucky ones, and even then, You see the wariness in the faces of those who wait. Prison changes a person. The ones who return are not the same as the ones who left. They carry the prison with them in the slump of their shoulders, the way they flinch at loud noises, the way they keep to the edges of a room. Freedom, when it finally comes, can be as heavy as any chain. You have seen men return to the prison gates days or weeks after their release, pleading for a bed, a meal, a place to hide from the world that no longer wants them. The warden turns them away, of course. There is no room for guests. The lucky ones find work sweeping streets or hauling refuse. The rest drift into the shadows, forgotten by the city, as if they never existed at all. For some, release is a punishment all its own. The world moves on, indifferent to their suffering. Old debts remain unpaid. Old enemies remember every slight. Sometimes, the village itself becomes another prison. Doors slammed shut, whispers behind hands, children warned not to stare. The law has declared them free, but freedom, it turns out, is not something you can simply hand over with a piece of paper. You think sometimes of what it must feel like to step outside after years in the dark. The brightness would hurt your eyes. The space would seem too wide, too empty. You have heard stories of men who walk in circles for days, unable to sleep without the sound of distant wailing, unable to eat without fear that someone will steal their food. One old woman, released after 20 years, collapsed in the street and died before she reached the first crossroads. They buried her with the same indifference the guards show to a dead rat. It is not only the prisoners who fear release. You find yourself wondering what would happen if you left. If, one morning, you hung up your keys, stepped out through the gates, and tried to become someone else. You suspect it would not be easy. The prison has changed you too. Your hands are never quite clean, your sleep never quite undisturbed. You keep your back to the wall in crowded places. You expect betrayal in every conversation. The world outside has become as strange and dangerous to you as it is to any prisoner. Sometimes a prisoner asks you quietly what it is like outside. You hesitate before answering. You want to tell them it is better, that the air is sweeter, that freedom is a balm for every wound. But you see the way hope flickers in their eyes, and you remember the ones who came back, begging for a cell, for food, for shelter from the cold. So you just shrug, say nothing, and move on. When a prisoner is released, the rest watch closely. Some mutter curses, envy, resentment, disbelief. Others whisper prayers, as if one person's freedom might be a good omen for all. You learn to ignore it, just another ripple in the endless monotony of days. The absence is quickly filled. Another face takes the place in the cell, another number on your list. There are no second chances here. The world outside is no kinder than the world within. Release is only a different kind of test, one most do not pass. You stand at the gate, watching the freed walk away. You wonder if they will remember this place, this moment. You wonder if you will ever forget. You suspect the answer in both cases is no. If the days in the prison are dull and grinding, the nights are something else entirely. Night is when the real strangeness settles over the stones, when the routine grows teeth and the familiar corridors warp into something hostile, uncanny, almost alive. You do not volunteer for the night shift, but eventually everyone draws the short straw. The sun sets, and you light your lantern, and for the next 10 hours, you belong to the darkness. It begins quietly enough. The prisoners, exhausted from hunger and cold, slouch into uneasy sleep, or at least the closest thing to it. The cell block hushes, voices fading to murmurs, coughs to whispers. The regular noises of the day, the clatter of bowls, the stamping of boots, the calls and curses, recede, leaving only the small, dreadful sounds that do not stop. The creak of beams, the distant drip of water, the scuttling of rats in the walls. At night, every noise is magnified. The stone seems to groan with memories. Your footsteps echo longer, deeper. You make your rounds with care. The flame of your lantern is small, barely pushing back the dark. Each cell is a pool of shadow. You peer in, counting heads, watching for movement. Sometimes a prisoner is awake, sitting up on the straw, staring at nothing. Sometimes they mutter to themselves, lips working over prayers or curses or simply the endless tally of days. You avoid their gaze. At night, the line between jailer and jailed feels thinner, and you do not wish to see yourself reflected in their haunted eyes. Night brings out all the things the day suppresses. You hear things you cannot explain, a wail that rises and falls along the corridor, a sound that might be weeping or might be laughter. Once you find a prisoner standing at his bars, hands bloodied, eyes wide, claiming he saw a woman in the corner. The other guards joke that the prison is full of ghosts. You stop laughing after the first month. It is during the night shift that accidents happen. Prisoners sometimes use the darkness as cover for schemes. The passing of contraband, the settling of scores, the careful scraping at mortar that over weeks might loosen a stone. You listen for patterns, taps, coughs, coded whispers. You learn to distinguish the harmless from the dangerous. But vigilance is exhausting. Fatigue seeps into your bones. You find yourself dozing in your chair, jerking awake at a sudden noise, heart pounding as if you have been running for your life. Sometimes the warden makes a surprise inspection, his cloak trailing behind him, his eyes cold and accusing. He walks the corridors, sniffing for disobedience, watching for sloppiness. He reminds you, in hushed tones, of what happened to the last jailer who let a prisoner escape, who let a fire start, who let anything at all disturb the uneasy peace. You nod, swallowing your fear, telling yourself you will last until dawn. But dawn feels impossibly far away. There is a quality to prison nights that makes time stretch, minutes turning into hours, hours turning into an eternity. Your thoughts wander. You remember stories you have heard, tales of prisoners who went mad in solitary, of guards who disappeared into the darkness, of cries for help that were never answered. The prison is older than you, older than your father, perhaps older than the stones themselves. You begin to believe it has a will, a slow, patient hunger that only reveals itself at night. The other guards are no comfort. You pass each other in the gloom, exchanging nods or muttered complaints, careful not to show fear. Some drink to keep the dread at bay, sharing a flask passed hand to hand. Others play dice, betting with matches or scraps of jerky. No one speaks of the worst shift, the hour before dawn, when the night seems endless, the cold at its deepest, and your courage at its lowest. There are emergencies, too. A prisoner falls ill and begins to scream, rousing the others. You are called to drag him to the infirmary, fighting down your own revulsion as he thrashes and spits. Sometimes a fight breaks out, sudden and savage, shadows grappling in the half light, until you and the others pull them apart. The night amplifies everything. The blood is blacker, the shouts more desperate, the sense of threat impossible to ignore. And then there is the waiting. So much waiting. You count your own breaths, your own steps, the slow guttering of the candle. You write your reports by lamplight, eyes stinging, fingers numb. You tell yourself stories, anything to keep your mind occupied. You try not to remember that there is another night waiting for you after this one, and another after that. When dawn finally breaks, it is not a moment of relief, but of exhaustion. The light seeps in pale and thin, and you squint against it, blinking like a mole. The prisoners stir. The day shift arrives. You hand over your keys, your notes, your responsibilities. You walk back to your room, collapsing onto a hard cot, shivering despite the morning sun. But sleep does not come easily. The prison is still with you, the echo of the night alive in your bones. You dream of corridors that never end, doors that will not open, cries that no one hears. You tell yourself it was just another shift, but you know the truth. The nights are longer than the days, and sometimes they never truly end. If you think prison is a world of equals, you have not looked closely enough. The bars are iron, the food is thin, and misery is universal, but power still finds its way through cracks in stone. A hidden ladder, invisible to outsiders, but as rigid as any lord's court, rules the lives of the condemned. You, as a jailer, are meant to keep order, but you soon realize the prisoners do not need your help to organize themselves. They have their own system, and it is every bit as ruthless as yours. At the bottom are the newcomers, the freshly sentenced, the shivering, the uncertain. You know them instantly. Their eyes dart from face to face, seeking kindness or at least neutrality. They find neither. The old timers, the ones with scars and eyes that never smile, size them up like a butcher does a side of beef. There are rituals for breaking in the new, stolen blankets, a cuff in the dark, whispered threats that promise misery, if rules are not followed. You look the other way because you are told this is the way of things, because you do not have the time or patience to protect every trembling soul. Above them are the survivors. These are the prisoners who have learned when to keep silent, when to trade, when to fight, and when to flee. They gather in small groups, cliques united by old allegiances, family, village, faith, or simply mutual need. They barter for scraps of food, for the best patch of straw, for a favor from the kitchen or the infirmary. Their alliances shift with the seasons, but their goal never changes. Endure whatever the cost. Then there are the enforcers, the true powers of the prison, kings and queens of a kingdom built on whispered bargains and bruised flesh. They are not always the biggest or the strongest. Often, they are the most cunning, the ones who remember every slight, every debt, every secret. They control the flow of contraband, bits of cloth, extra bread, a sliver of soap. They decide who is punished and who is protected. Sometimes they act as the intermediaries between the prisoners and the guards, passing on information in exchange for small privileges. You learn quickly that a nod from one of these figures is worth more than a promise from the warden. Some of the guards resent this order, thinking it undermines their authority. They try to break the cliques, to isolate the ringleaders, to stamp out every show of power that does not come from above. They fail mostly. The prisoners adapt, shifting their allegiances, making their deals in lower voices, in subtler ways. You learn that trying to control the prison's true power structure is like trying to cage smoke. The more you chase it, the faster it slips away. There are outcasts, too, prisoners too weak, too strange, or too stubborn to fit into any group. They are bullied, stolen from, sometimes simply ignored until they fade into madness or death. You might feel pity sometimes, but pity is dangerous. It can make you a target just as surely as any open challenge. You learn to keep your distance, to watch but not interfere. The hierarchy is enforced through violence, but also through ritual and memory. Each meal, each trip to the yard is a performance. Where you sit, who you speak to, whether you look another prisoner in the eye, these things matter. A misstep can mean a broken nose or a week without food. A clever word, a favor remembered, can mean protection when you need it most. Stories are traded, old wrongs remembered and avenged. Forgiveness is rare, grudges last for years. Sometimes the enforcers make your life easier. They keep the peace, settle disputes before they become riots, even turn over contraband if it serves their interests. You might find yourself relying on them despite what you are told, because their discipline is often more effective than your own. You are not supposed to admit this, not even to yourself, but you learn to recognize the quiet power of a word given in confidence, a threat whispered in the yard. In the end, you are all working for the same thing: survival, order, another day without disaster. Yet the hierarchy is fragile. A new prisoner with nothing to lose, a guard with a score to settle, a rumor of pardon or escape. Any of these can upset the delicate balance. When the order is challenged, violence follows. The strong reassert their dominance. The weak suffer, and you are left to clean up the mess. Sometimes you wonder if the warden understands how close he is to losing control, how little it takes to turn this uneasy peace into chaos. You find yourself respecting the prisoner's order, even as you despise it. It is a system built on pain, but also on a strange kind of logic. It mirrors the world outside in all its brutality, all its cunning. You, the jailer, are part of that world, whether you want to be or not. At night, you think of the ladder. You wonder where you would stand if the tables were turned. You tell yourself you are different, that the bars run but only one way. But as the years drag on, you begin to see the truth. In the end, everyone in the prison, guard or prisoner, must climb, must fight, must cling to whatever rung they can. There is no safety, only the desperate scramble to stay above the bottom. You tell yourself it will never happen. Not here, not on your shift. The warden says order is absolute. The guards mutter about respect, about control, about knowing every inch of the prison's maze. But you know better. You feel it in the walls, in the way the prisoners watch you, in the silence that grows heavier with each passing day of thin gruel and thick fear. Tension builds, quiet as dust, until suddenly it is everywhere, loud and violent, and impossible to ignore. The riot always begins with something small, a slap, a stolen crust, a rumor that a favorite has been beaten too harshly, or a promise broken one too many times. It might start in the yard, where power is tested with every meal and every glance, or it might begin in the dark of night, when voices echo through the corridors and hope or desperation finds a spark. The first shouts are a warning, but by then it is already too late. You are no longer a bystander. You are inside the storm. You remember your training. You shout for backup. You raise your club. You try to make yourself bigger, stronger, a symbol of the order you are supposed to represent. But the order is gone, swept away by a tide of rage and hunger and long festering wounds. The prisoners do not move as one. Some are leaders, shouting orders, pushing forward. Others are swept along, caught up in a force larger than themselves. Some just hide, praying to be overlooked. You hear the sounds first, the pounding of fists on doors, the crash of a bench thrown against a wall, the sharp, panicked cries of someone caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. You see the chaos, bodies surging, guards wading in, clubs swinging, boots stomping, the sickening crack of bone against stone. Smoke stings your eyes. Where did it come from? Someone set a mattress alight, or maybe a bundle of straw. The flames leap, licking at the rafters, and panic spreads faster than fire. You have been told not to hesitate. You are to protect yourself first, the other guards second, the prisoners third. The warden shouts orders, his face red, voice raw, but the riot pays no mind. You see the doctor cowering in a corner, clutching his medical bag like a charm against evil. The priest is gone. No one saw him leave. You realize with a cold certainty that you are alone. In the middle of it, time warps. You move through it as if underwater. You swing your club, feel it connect, see faces twist in pain or anger or something deeper. You know some of these men by name. You remember their stories, their quiet moments, their pleas for mercy. Now, all that is gone. The only thing that matters is survival. You feel your own fear rising, sharp and metallic, and you understand, finally, that the difference between guard and prisoner is not so great. You see guards fall, dragged down by desperate hands. You see prisoners crushed, trampled, left bleeding on the stones. The noise is overwhelming, filling every space in your head, drowning out thought. There are moments of stillness, a lull, a hush, a heartbeat, where it seems as if the riot has burned itself out. But then it erupts again, fiercer, more desperate. The prison's order has collapsed. For a few hours, perhaps, the walls belong to no one. At some point, you realize you are not just defending yourself, you are lashing out. You feel the thrill of violence, the release of all your own pent up anger and frustration. It is not noble, it is not just. But in the middle of the chaos, you stop being a bystander. You become a part of it. You are swept up, no longer judge or jailer, but a fighter, a survivor, another animal in the pit. Eventually, the riot ends. The guards regroup. The stronger prisoners reassert control. The weak are herded back to their cells. The warden reappears, bloodied but unbroken, barking orders, counting heads. You stumble through the wreckage, splintered benches, blood streaked walls, smoke stained air. You do not speak. No one does. There is too much to say, and none of it safe. After, there are punishments. The warden is merciless. Solitary for the ringleaders, beatings for those caught with weapons or contraband. The infirmary is full, and the doctor works in silence, treating friend and foe alike. The priest returns, offering hollow comfort. The prisoners withdraw, sullen and subdued, their hope spent for now. The guards are changed too. You see it in the way they hold their clubs, the way they look at you, at each other. Something has broken that cannot be easily mended. You replay it in your mind over and over. What could you have done differently? Could you have stopped it, or at least made it less brutal? The truth is, you do not know. The riot was inevitable, a pressure valve released for a world built on cruelty and fear. You tell yourself you are not to blame, but you do not quite believe it. After a riot, the prison is never the same. Trust, such as it was, is gone. Every step is watched, every word measured. The walls feel tighter, the air colder. You return to your routine, but it is just an act, a performance for a world that has lost its script. You are the jailer. You are the bystander. You are the participant. In a riot, you learn what you are capable of. You learn what everyone is capable of, and you learn, most of all, that in a place like this, no one is truly innocent. You do not notice when it happens. You do not wake up one morning with a sudden revelation, clutching your chest as the horror of your life finally strikes you in full. No, the prison claims you slowly, gently, as a fog rolling in from the river, settling into your bones, muffling your senses until you cannot tell where you end and the stones begin. Life inside becomes life itself, not a pause, not a punishment, but the whole sum of your existence. Your days blur together. You do not count them anymore. Sunrise, roll call, bread and gruel, the clatter of keys, the moans from solitary. Each moment is indistinguishable from the next. Each year, another circle carved in the same old wood. The seasons change outside, but you see them only as variations in the cold, a damp chill, a biting frost, a sudden stifling heat in summer that makes the stench in the cells thick and syrupy. You forget the taste of spring, the color of autumn, the sound of rain that does not echo from stone. You begin to do everything with your eyes closed. Not literally, of course. You still watch, you still check, you still keep your guard, but you stop seeing. You stop noticing the faces of the prisoners, the bruises that bloom and fade, the wounds that never really heal. Their stories become noise, their hopes background music to your daily rounds. Even your fellow guards become shadows, figures moving in the mist, their laughter and anger as distant as thunder in another town. You learn to turn off your ears as well. The cries in the night, the desperate prayers, the arguments over scraps, the muffled pleas from behind locked doors, they wash over you, leaving no trace. You stop listening because listening is dangerous. To hear is to care, and to care is to risk breaking, to risk remembering that you too are human. Some guards cope with jokes, with drink, with cruelty. You simply grow numb. You perfect the art of not reacting. When a prisoner dies, you write the report, note the date, move the body, and then eat your dinner as if nothing has happened. When the warden lectures you about discipline, about order, about the sacred trust of your role, you nod in all the right places and forget his words before you reach the next corridor. You stop feeling guilt, or at least you think you do. You are not sure anymore. You see new guards arrive, faces full of curiosity and dread. You watch them flinch at the smell, the noise, the first beating. You see them change little by little until one day they do not flinch at all. You wonder if you looked the same once. You wonder if anyone noticed when you stopped being yourself. Time passes. You measure it only in losses, prisoners who vanish, colleagues who quit or drink themselves to ruin, memories that fade to a gray nothing. You think about leaving. Sometimes you dream of another life, somewhere clean and bright, but the dream is brief and unsatisfying. The prison is all you know. You realize you would not know how to live anywhere else. There are rumors, sometimes, of escape, some clever tunnel, a bribe, a careless moment by a tired guard. Sometimes a prisoner does get out, and for a while the prison buzzes with excitement, with fear, with blame, but always order returns. The walls swallow the story. The routine resumes undisturbed. You know the stories of the prisoners by heart, though you do not admit it. You know the names of the ones who cannot sleep, the ones who still hope, the ones who have already died in spirit, though their bodies still shuffle to roll call. You know your own story too, but you never say it aloud. You do not write it in your reports. You do not confess it to the priest, even if he asks. Your story is the same as the prison's: monotony, endurance, the slow erasure of everything that once mattered. At times, you wonder who you are guarding, these prisoners or yourself. The walls keep them in, but they also keep you out of the world, out of change, out of the possibility of ever being anything but what you are. You realize, perhaps too late, that the bars do not distinguish. The difference between jailer and jailed is thinner than the crack in a winter window. Sometimes, on the rarest of nights, you wake from a dream of freedom, sweating, breathless, heart hammering. For a moment, you see the world as it is: brutal, indifferent, endlessly repeating. Then you roll over, close your eyes, and sink back into the comfort of routine. The prison is a lullaby, and you are both singer and sleeper. In the end, you survive by refusing to see. Life with your eyes closed, your mind numbed by habit, your soul hidden beneath the weight of stone and silence. It is not heroism, nor is it evil. It is simply the only way to keep living, to keep breathing, to keep waking up for another day behind the walls. You are the jailer. You are the outcast. You are the prisoner. And the world beyond the bars forgets you, just as you have forgotten yourself.